Thank you, everybody. It's really great to be here in Bangkok. Very excited for the race this evening. I'm Brett Clothier, head of the Athletics Integrity Unit. So we are the independent body set up by World Athletics to govern and regulate the integrity of the sport. And one of our key functions is anti-doping, which I'll speak to you about today. This first slide describes why we have a really big doping problem in the marathon, in road racing. Let me explain it to you. So, normally, the Athletics Integrity Unit is funded by World Athletics. We get $8 million a year for them. And part of that funding is to protect the integrity of the very top races, the gold medal, the podium finishes at the Olympics and the Athletics World Championships. So our anti-doping program, usually for all of the athletics events, is an out-of-competition testing program that we run for the top 10 ranks basically in the world, male and female, for all of the different events. Top 10 men and women in the 100, 200, 400, 800, high jump, long jump. That's who we're focusing on for the out-of-competition testing program. So the out-of-competition testing program, those top 10 athletes form part of what's called our registered testing pool. They're the athletes who provide us their whereabouts, and we can test them every day of the year out of competition in their preparation for their major races. And that's what we do. The way the system works is that the national anti-doping agencies, the domestic anti-doping bodies, they focus on the athletes below our very top tier, below our registered testing pool. And in most events, there's a diversity of countries involved. The national anti-doping agencies each add their fair share, and we get a reasonable coverage to protect the podium finishes at the Olympics or the World Championships. But in the marathon, in the road race, this structure is completely disrupted by the fact that we don't really just have the Olympics or the World Championships that we're concerned about. We have, in fact, hundreds and hundreds of very lucrative, well-paying road races around the world who are paying thousands, hundreds and hundreds, in fact thousands, of professional athletes to run and compete in these races. So the further issues compounding this problem is that 80% of those athletes come from just 2 countries. So the national anti-doping agencies in those countries trying to eat into this, you can see the big white bottom part of the pyramid here. They can't get into that far into that pyramid under their normal funding arrangements at all. The other thing that compounds it is that the top runners only can usually race in 2 races a year, unlike the 100 metres, 200, where they can race all year long. You know, so we have this real unique set of circumstances that applies only to the road, only to the marathon, that completely destroys the usual structural framework of anti-doping. So this is the problem a few years ago we had to solve. This is what it created, in fact, is an alarming stat like this one that came in, hope you can read that in red, that came in 2019. 75% of the podium finishes back then from gold label races were never tested out of competition. So not only were they never tested, they knew they were never going to be tested because they weren't in an out of competition testing pool. They weren't giving their whereabouts to anybody. So this was a real big problem. We spoke to World Athletics about it. World Athletics, through its label program, came up with the solution, which is for all the races as part of the program, the athlete representatives and the athletes themselves, through a small percentage of the prize money, to fund an out-of-competition testing pool. So what we have is a much better situation now, where instead of going into 2023, instead of just the very top of that pyramid only, a very small portion, being out of competition tested, next year we're going to have a large professional pool of runners, 300 strong, 150 men and 150 women in this out of competition testing pool. A much stronger situation. But still, we still have a significant chunk of white here in this pyramid. The good news that we've received in the last couple of weeks, because we've been making a lot of cases coming out of Kenya, we've managed to secure a promise of additional funding from the Kenyan government to fund their national anti-doping agency. This funding promise is for an additional $5 million US over at least 5 years to go into anti-doping in Kenya. This is a huge, significant amount of money. Right now, today, the Kenyan anti-doping system is funded with $2.8 million per year in total. So this is going to make almost a threefold increase for anti-doping in Kenya. So this funding will make a huge dent, in Kenya at least, in this untested pool of runners. This is really, really important. Even when we're controlling the very top of the tree, in my team at the anti-doping, at the Athletics Integrity Unit, those runners are under immense pressure from the athletes below them who aren't in our pool. That's because of the huge financial incentives, the incredible depth of talent that exists in Kenya. The athletes at the top who are under our control are really under immense pressure from the athletes who are coming at them from below in this pyramid. So the additional funding in Kenya is really going to be a game changer in that country. It'll make the pyramid look a lot more like this, which gives us a great platform to really address this problem. It's not the end of the solution. There's a lot of hard work to come, but this is now going a long way to fixing the structural problems that previously existed. So, now I want to talk about what we actually do with this funding that we get from the industry, that we get from the government, and how it actually makes an impact. Just a quick recap, the Integrity Unit is an independent body. We're separate from the commercial interests of World Athletics through amendment to the World Athletics Constitution. We're operationally independent. I have an independent board that I report to. We don't have any reporting lines through the through World Athletics. And World Athletics was the ones that set this up and amended their constitution, which can only be changed with a 2/3 majority to unpick any of this. So our approach when we're doing anti-doping, it's not just about extra money for extra tests. It's not a numbers game of just doing lots and lots of tests. The way we operate is all founded on the importance of intelligence. Intelligence-led testing, intelligence that relates to investigations, intelligence relates to how we manage cases once we uncover them, and also intelligence gives us the focus for our education programs that we have to run. This is a really important part of our methodology, that when we get funding, it's just not going money into more tests in a numbers game. Intelligence is at the heart of everything we do, and this is how, in our programs, we manage to catch very high-level cheaters. The results over the last 5 years since our creation in 2017 speak for themselves, and this both on the road and on the track. We can actually uncover doping and doping networks as they happen at the highest levels of our sport. not just in terms of the athletes themselves, but also in terms of the administrators and the support personnel behind the athletes. I think the sport is starting to restore some credibility over the last few years, thanks to these efforts in anti-doping. People realise that no news isn't good news when it comes to anti-doping, and they're looking for credibility from our sport, and that's what we're giving them through our programs. So, the funding for the anti-doping program for the road races, we report on exactly make an accountability of how we use the money, our results from the program. This reporting is available on our website. It's very important to us to be accountable to the program funders. One thing I want to talk about is education, just for a few moments before we move to any questions. We're not just in the game of going from case to case to case. We want to make a difference to the sport and to the anti-doping situation in East Africa. We do this through making the structural changes I talked about, seeking funding from the governments, as I talked about, but also, most importantly, through educating the athletes. We need credibility to really start with the education. It's hard to try to convince athletes not to cheat if we're not able to actually, help them by catching the cheats. So we've got to that point now, and now we're really making a big focus on education in the local languages in East Africa, Amharic, Swahili, Oromo, etc. We're conducting many online direct education sessions, which have been really well received. There's been an absolute lack of appropriate education in Kenya and Ethiopia. And when we go to fill this void, we're really getting a strong reception from the athletes. It's very, very encouraging, what we're seeing so far. We're also doing some really interesting innovations in the education space. First of all, in our online sessions, a real goal of ours is to have two-way conversations with the athletes, not just talk to them about what the rules are, but hear from them about what their problems, what they perceive to be the solutions, and how we can help them. And we're also connecting directly with the East African athletes in two pilot projects, one for Ethiopia, one for Kenya. In their local languages and dialect, we're doing something called Education on Demand. We're using Telegram in Ethiopia, WhatsApp in Kenya for these groups. It's allowing the athletes, wherever they are in the world, to ask questions, anything about their supplement, medication, clarification of the rules. It's really fostering. We have people available on this app to answer their questions. It's also fostering a peer-to-peer learning environment. We're using storytelling also to keep the momentum going on the app. Once a week, we put in scenarios for discussion and information that generates a lot of strong feedback from the athletes. The conversations that are actually going on in these groups with the very best athletes in the world, Kipchoge, Bekele, they're all part of these groups and are interacting with their fellow athletes on a weekly basis. It's very, very encouraging to us. So here are some more details of the program. It's a balance of, as it says there, providing information, actually engaging with the athletes, especially in terms of topics about their values, and providing support where they need it. So that was all from me from today. Happy to take any questions about our program, anti-doping in general, and the situation in the marathon.
Good morning, and thank you for this very informative presentation. I got a question. To me, it seems we have two interests aligned. We have the interest of the athletes in Africa and some other parts of the world, and we have the interest of the events who want to have a very competitive field with new records every time. So these two incentives and interests are so strong that doping keeps popping up because the demand is there and the payoffs are so big for the events and the runners. So I don't see why or how your efforts, which are great, can make long-term impact if these other two forces are so strong, and even with new funding, I don't see how you can overcome those.
Okay, well, I'm thankfully a little bit more optimistic than you. I think in every sport we have an incentive to perform, and that's what sport is. So the money that's in the sport, isn't a problem unless there's a structural imbalance. You need the appropriate funding for integrity to match the financial incentive, and this is the same in every sport around the world. No matter what it is, and no matter what the integrity problem, we have the same. There are serious integrity problems in match fixing, in football, tennis, other sports. Where it gets out of whack is where the financial incentive to cheat far outweighs the financial resources or incentives on the court or on the pitch, and that's why, as an example, match fixing attacks lower level matches. Okay, do you understand? So the whole thing is to bring why these structural changes are important is to bring the balance to something like reasonable. It's a never-ending, challenge. It's never going to be. We're never going to eradicate doping. There's always going to be this doping, but we can reduce it significantly thanks to these structural changes. I truly believe that.
Thank you.
Okay, no other questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brett.